Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for being here today. We will follow the program as printed, and I'd like to call forward Mr. Donnell Holt, who bring a welcome from Williams Memorial CME Church.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon now. On behalf of Reverend Dr. Dwayne Crew, our pastor here, he is under the weather today and regrets that he could not be here. I would like to welcome all of you to Williams Memorial CME Church. If you need to use the restroom, you can go through either one of these doors, and the restroom is in the rear. Thank you and come again.
All right. Thank you, Donnell. At this time, we'll have greetings from Ms. Hardy, President, Augusta Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta, Sorority Incorporated.
Good afternoon. Um, in the absence of Reverend Crew, who couldn't be here with us today, to our distinguished panelists and our distinguished guests, to each one of you who are indeed our distinguished guests, I bring you greetings on behalf of the Augusta Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. There are just a few of us running around, and when you usually see a group of people in red, it's probably us. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just want to put a couple of things on your mind as you leave here today. How many of you are under threat of being fired from your job to show up here this morning? How many of you are under threat of being lynched to show up here this morning? How many of you were asked to spell backwards forwards when you walked into the door? How many stars can you see in the sky? These were the kinds of things that our ancestors had to endure. And when we say ancestors, usually people think way back, but I can talk about my grandmother's experience. But these were the things that they had to endure just to show up to want to vote. So it is so very important, the message that we will receive today. It is so very important that each of us will take what we receive today and use whatever platform we have, our voices to our relatives. Maybe we might get a chance to wave a sign, but use your platform. I was going to include TikTok, but I think it's about to go away. So, but use your platform and tell somebody why it is important that we should vote. I'm reminded of my voting precinct, who records 3,500 plus voters. And in one of the last elections in the 2022 year cycle, they only had 5 people to show up at that precinct to vote. And 2 of them were myself and my daughter. So we have to get the message out. And I am so very, very pleased to have the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda here today, because they have a message, and it is a resounding message. But again, accept my challenge. Please use your platform to echo what you hear today and what you feel in your heart. It is why it is important to vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy. My name is Keith Brown, and I am a member of the Georgia Coalition of the People's Agenda. Our executive director is Ms. Helen Butler, and my direct supervisor, who's over Augusta area, is Mr. Willie Burns, former mayor of Washington, Georgia. I'd like to welcome you today to this event, Civic Engagement, the Importance of Voting in 2024. We'd like to thank Reverend Dr. Dwayne Crew and Williams Memorial CME Church, who just celebrated 150 years of serving the Augusta area, for hosting this event. We'd also like to thank Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated for a partnership that we have enjoyed working with them on doing voter registration. We appreciate being able to work with them and look forward to much continued success. Ms. Helen Butler, who is one of our panelists, received her inspiration from Reverend Joseph Lowry. Mrs. Janice Ellen Jackson, who I know from the city of Augusta, former city administrator, also one of our panelists. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about our purpose here today. Our purpose is to discuss the importance of voting in 2024. Your vote is your voice, and it is imperative that we encourage all citizens to get registered and exercise their right to vote. Times are critical now, and we need to go to the polls in record numbers. Ms. Helen Butler, Executive Director for the Georgia Coalition of the People's Agenda, also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, will be one of our panelists. Ms. Butler. Also, Ms. Janice Allen Jackson, Local Matters Podcast of Georgia, Augusta Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Jackson also is former city administrator for the city of Augusta and did an outstanding job for us locally when she served in that position. Let's see. Ladies, is there anything you'd like to say to open us up about what you'd like to talk about today and what it is that we do?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Butler, as Keith said. I'm so happy to be here with my sorors. But I want to say that I bring you greetings from the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. For those of you who may not know what that is, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization founded by the late Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry, who was the dean of the Civil Rights Movement. He, along with some other civil rights leaders, brought together organizations and representatives from diverse groups. And our primary mission is to improve the quality of governance by having an active, informed electorate that will hold our elected officials accountable. So we do a lot of civic engagement work, 365 days a year. We get you registered. We educate you about the process. We educate you about the candidates. We don't tell you who to vote for, but we tell you how to get that information. But more importantly, we mobilize you to vote. We provide rides to the polls. We have a ride to the poll website, as well as a ride to the poll app that you can request a ride anywhere in the state, as well as you can volunteer to provide that ride to the poll. But more importantly, we do a lot of protection of the right to vote. We have an election protection group that does poll monitoring. We actually assist voters. We train volunteers to assist voters as they go to vote and to make sure that there are no barriers in place, that everything should be as it is, so there's ease of voting. But we also have a democracy squad because, as you know, there were a lot of laws that were passed that were sort of like suppressing our vote to vote, our right to vote. So what we do with our democracy squad is we monitor boards of elections, we monitor city council meetings, we monitor county commission meetings to see what's going on, to make sure we're on the forefront of what's happening in our communities, and to make sure that we can be proactive versus reactive. So again, by holding people accountable, we have a policy and engagement director that is down at the legislature right now, fighting back those bills that will really harm our neighborhoods. So that's a summary of some of the things we do. We also have a Black Youth Vote program and initiative where we have 40 Black Youth Vote fellows. And I'm so proud of them this year they actually decided that they wanted to have introduced in the legislature approximately 13 bills. One of their bills was introduced, and they actually testified at the hearing. It didn't get past the crossover, but it's coming back because they're very motivated to get involved. They thank Representative Eric Bell for actually introducing that legislation because they decided what it was they wanted, but they also presented to him what would be a logical remedy for that situation. So we're happy and proud of those Black Youth Vote Fellows. We also convened the Black Women's Roundtable, where we look at nothing but women's issues. Health, wealth, and wealthy and wise is our motto for the Black Women's Roundtable. We just got back from Washington, D.C., where we lobbied our congressional delegation, as well as we attended DOJ to talk about some of the things that we wanted to see them doing. So that's the people's agenda in a nutshell.
Ms. Jackson, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. We're so pleased to be here this afternoon to share some information. Thank you, because I learned a lot about the people's agenda that I didn't know as you were speaking. I think there is a presentation that the AV team can go ahead and load right now, and while they're doing that, there we are. I can talk a little bit about the Local Matters podcast and how I kind of fell into that. A few years ago, 4 years ago to be exact, it was March of 2020. I started the Local Matters podcast of Georgia, had no clue of what I was doing. And some days I still wonder if I know what I'm doing, but I started that because a few months prior to that, someone told me it would be good for my brand to have a podcast or a radio show at that time. And I thought, well, yeah, it might be, but I don't know what in the world I would talk about. So one day I was in a conversation with Reverend K.B. Martin of Antioch Baptist Church, and he was talking about how he would get the church van, even get a mother of the church or someone with him to go into neighborhoods. They would pick up people, and we would say, hey, we even got somebody to watch your children. You have to worry about it. So just load up you and your children, all load up on the van. I got one of the church mothers to watch them. And the mothers would then say, well, yeah, I'm registered to vote, but I don't know what to vote for. I don't know what I'm doing. So that was the genesis for me of let's help people get prepared. Because even those of us who consider ourselves to be prepared voters, consider us to be pretty much engaged and involved, sometimes we can get tripped up by some of those issues. We may have researched some of the candidates for the major offices, but the further we get down the ballot, the more lost we get in terms of what would be best in our best interest to do and who to support. So I decided that would be the platform for Local Matters, and just making all of this up sort of on the fly. And as I got into it, I would get feedback from people. One of my dear friends in the audience is one of those people who gives me feedback. He said, Janice, you need to explain X. Isn't that right, Mary? You told me X, but you need to explain why, so that really is how we got going and how I sort of found a place for the podcast. So a couple of things. I always request this, shamelessly, I have to make these requests. If you are on YouTube, please pull out your cell phone and follow the Local Matters podcast of Georgia on YouTube. If you can't figure out how to do it, walk up to me after the thing. I'll pull out your cell phone and I'll help you do it. If you're on the Facebook platform as well, we ask you to support us there. That's one of the things that helps people take you seriously. If you got followers and subscribers, people take you seriously. So I'm trying to build those numbers up. In terms of what I wanted to present today, I do want to talk some at the local level. We call this session The Importance of Voting in 2024. 2024, the even number of years, 24, 22, and then 26. Those will be the years where we select our local commission members as well as our school board members. We also select on every 4 years, half of the, to make that clear, half of our Augusta Commission is up for reelection every 2 years. This year, 2024, is the odd numbered seats on the council. 2026, it'll be the even numbered seats. So during this is a presidential election year, of course. So half of your commission and half of your school board is going to be up during the presidential election year. And then during the gubernatorial election year, half of your school board and commission seats are going to be up. So that's the way to think about it. And then every 2 years, you're going to be voting for state representatives because they only serve a 2-year term. And then you also will have judges and both Superior Court, State Court, Magistrate Court. So there's always something very important that's going to be on the ballot in every even numbered year that we need to be paying attention to. If we could go to the second page of this presentation, I think it's back here and it's up there. It's a little small, but I'm going to try to read it for you. I just want to give you an idea, following up on what Sarah Hardy said about 5 people showing up at the polls at your precinct. Let's look at a few elections, November 7th. And I went through the most recent elections to give you that data. On November 7th, Coliseum Splosh, roughly 12% of us voted. And that number is from my memory because when I went on their website for whatever reason, and all this data is at the Board of Elections website, but that page was not up. I got an error message, but if I recall correctly, it was around 12 or 13%, which is actually more than what it was the last time we voted on the Coliseum Splosh, because then it was more like 9 or 10%. So 140,000, 130,000 maybe registered voters in Richmond County. And so a very small number of residents of Richmond County made the decision to support that Coliseum Splosh. Now, I was happy because I thought it was the right move, but a very, very small number of people made that decision. You go back, and this was the worst of all, March 21st, 2023, a special election for the school board. You all will remember Tyreek Robinson passed away. He had been elected to District 6, and he died before he could take office. So there was a special election to fill that seat. Less than 1% of the registered voters in District 6 went to the polls. So when I looked at the numbers, and then I'll keep up with my numbers about how many people are listening to the Local Matters podcast, I had the candidates. There were 2 candidates in that race. I had them on. There were actually more people who listened to that episode than who voted in that election. Think about how scary that is. And this is an election to make decisions for 30,000 children who are in the Richmond County school system. So basically, if somebody got 80 votes to get a license to make decisions for 30,000 children. Okay? Think about it. That's all it took. I think there were only 140 people maybe who voted. And like I said, more people listened to the episode because, a lot of times people will, even if you're not in the district, you'll listen to the episode just because you want to be familiar with who's running. And I appreciate that. That's why we're here. But just to think that folks in District 6 were that unmotivated that less than 1% of those people came to the polls. I also had Travis Doss, who is the executive director of the Board of Elections, come on to talk, about this. What's the cost of an election? He probably spent $30,000 putting on that election. So we basically wasted our own tax dollars when we didn't go to the polls. So I want you to think about this. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because probably everybody in here is a registered voter. But as you get out and talk to people, please share this type of information with folks because this is what people need to understand. You've essentially wasted your own money because there were some days the poll workers were sitting there with absolutely nobody walking through the door during the advanced voting period. So go back to December 20th, House District 129, that was also a special election. That was when Wayne Howard had passed away, and there were 4 people in that race to succeed him. Grand total of less than 8% of the population in District 129 went out to vote. So you have somebody, I didn't do the math on that one, but you've got, we elected, obviously I don't live in that district, but they elected a representative. That person now has input into every single piece of legislation that comes before the state of Georgia, and less than 8% of the people in the district voted. Okay. And let me clarify that. Less than 8% of the people voted totally. The number of people that voted for him is even smaller. I think he got about 60% of the vote. So he got 60% of less than 8%. Okay. And these are huge decisions that they're making. Next race, November 8th, 2023 general election had some school board races as well as all of the statewide offices. I believe, or some statewide offices were on that ballot. That was the highest of all of the elections that took place during this time period over the last few years. Had a little over 50%. So that's the only election where more than 50% of the registered voters turned out. May 24th, 2022, we had mayor, commission, and some statewide races on the ballot. There were a total turnout of about 28%. I believe I can see those numbers clearly, 28.2. August 20th, general primary election, that included commission seats. We didn't have the election earlier that year because of COVID. I think the election was postponed. So total 13%. And we know that there were some factors. People necessarily did not feel comfortable in August of 2020 and getting out, but the state was very aggressive about allowing absentee ballots to be submitted during that time, and even counting those absentees only 13%. June 2020 presidential primary and commission seats in some state races, 32%, which is second highest turnout. And then the special election for Commission District 5. That's as far back as I want to go. You all remember Andrew Jefferson passed away. And there was a special election to fill that seat. I think there were 4 people in that race. Less than 6% of the registered voters in District 5 came out. So this is serious. And we're spending money for it. And it has huge consequences in terms of policies and decisions that are made in reference to your money, your tax dollars, etc. If we go to the next page, what's on the ballot this time around? Augusta Commission seats 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Again, the odd number districts. I happen to live in District 1. And of course, that means I also am in Super District 9. So actually, I have 2 commission seats to vote for this time around. We just had the candidates for Augusta Commission District 1 on Local Matters. So please listen to that. SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Sheriff's race is on, which is the most important thing because one of the most important things because in Augusta, we are different from other counties in Georgia from the standpoint that our sheriff not only runs the jail, but he also handles all road patrol. You know, in most counties, the sheriff doesn't handle road patrol. But because of the Consolidation Act, it was decided at that time that there would no longer be an Augusta Police Department. I know some of y'all remember when we had APD, we had an Augusta Police Department. That went out with consolidation. So the sheriff controls all on the road public safety services. And you get stopped for a ticket, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They make decisions about who gets prosecuted, you know, or who gets sent over for prosecution. They write those tickets. The solicitor can decide if she's going to prosecute or not. But huge decisions, you know, and public safety is one of the things that has caught the attention of our entire country over the last several years. As we look at police brutality, we look at the death of folks on the street, and sometimes we wonder why, you know, why? Those are the people, we've left that in the hands of the sheriff. So he's on the ballot. We've got 3 competitors, I think, for him. That's a 4-year term. So we'll be voting on May 21st. District Attorney, we all know what happened with District Attorney, and I'm still hot about that. I'll be completely frank about that. You know, what happened last time. We wound up electing a district attorney to serve Burke, Richmond, and Columbia. And then within a few short months of the DA's election, he was only serving Burke and Richmond. So, and that was made by folks at the state level. So, you know, that decision got made by, you know, the folks that, you know, only 8% of us showed up to vote for, you know, made that decision. So we got district attorney back on the ballot. Our district attorney has 1 competitor. So there'll be 2 people in that race. Superior Court judgeships, I think we've got 1 contested judgeship where there are 3 people in the race, and there's no incumbent in that race. So that's going to be a wide open seat. And then, of course, there's the referendum on whether the mayor should have the right to vote on all issues coming before the commission. So those are 5 huge items that are on the ballot that affect us here locally, plus, of course, state rep, state senate, and there are a bunch of other things that we had a lot of uncontested races this time around, which is a little bit different from last time because I think almost everything was contested last time. So we don't have as many, these are the big contested races that are on the ballot this time around. And the school board races will take place in November. Those candidates actually will be running and on the ballot on our November ballot along with the presidential races. So if we look at the next slide, I just want to point this out. I went to the Richmond County Board of Elections website. They have wonderful information on that website. I don't know if this is something new and I missed it before, but they developed a voter information guide. And this has just about everything you ever want to know about an election in here. I mean, it's got all the polling places, it's got all the deadlines for voter registration, deadline to submit an absentee ballot, how to vote in advance, voters with disabilities, voters who are overseas because of military commitments, how to keep your voter registration up to date, how to do your absentee voting, what type of ID you need to bring to the polls with you, the entire advanced voting schedule, and the locations for advanced voting, key election dates for 25 and 26. So it doesn't just deal with 24, it deals with the subsequent years as well. And all of the offices that are on the ballot, the length of the terms, whether it's countywide or if it's just by district. I mean, it's just a lot of information here that is very, very helpful. I did, just print off the copy because I wanted to show you, but all of that information is available on their website in PDF form. So if there's ever anything you want to know, I think our Board of Elections, from what I can tell, has always been one of the most well-run departments of voter registration and election in the state, quite frankly. Because on election nights, I always go to the Secretary of State's website to get updates on which counties have reported and everything. And Richmond County is typically one of the first ones to report because they're organized, they got everything together, and they know what they're doing. Some of these counties, it may be the next day before you can figure out what happened, but Richmond County is on top of it, and we should be thankful for that. The last couple of slides I have, this last slide is just me. I've got my contact information and the information about the podcast. So you can learn a little bit more about that if you choose to go through. But hopefully this sets the stage and provides some information that we can use to continue our discussion. Thank you.
I'd like to apologize for overlooking and not doing our invocation. So at this time, if you'll oblige me, I'd like to have Miss Annie Rogers, member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, come forward and do our invocation, please.
Good afternoon. Let us bow our heads in prayer, please. Lord, we thank you for this day and the many blessings you bestow on all of us. We ask your blessings as we meet to discuss the importance of voting always, but especially in such a time as this. Let us be attentive and heed the suggestions given by our speakers. Lord, we solicit your intervention as we proceed. These blessings I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rogers. I appreciate it. And again, I apologize for skipping that. That should have been done earlier in our program. At this time, we're going to open up for questions and answers. And I have a question I'd like to start with, ladies, and I really appreciate you sharing the information that you did. What is it that we as citizens can do to encourage others on the importance of voting?
Thank you for that question, Keith. I just want to say that what I always tell people is voting matters. It's the first step, but it's not the final step. It includes everything in the process. Voting is the first step. You got to get registered. You got to know the process. And of course, that voter guide is great. And there are several voter guides out there that you can choose from. But I want people to understand that why it's important to be engaged in this process. If you look at public policy, every aspect of your life is impacted by a public policy. And who makes that public policy or law, if you want to call it? It's an elected official. From the day you're born to the day you die, and everything that happens to you in between is done by some public policy, or you're impacted by some public policy that an elected official makes. Let's just take the hospital where you're going to be born. It has to be zoned. And even the policy, as so many rural hospitals are being closed right now, is determined by a public policy that your legislators make, whether they're the federal legislators, whether they're state legislators, or whether it's your local legislators. And by that, I mean, in federal, you have your Congress, your U.S. representative, you have your U.S. senators. For your state, you have the same state representatives and state senators. In your local, you have your county commissioners, you have your city council, you have your mayors. So in your boards of education, so your sheriffs, those are positions that impact you no matter what. A lot of young people are always talking about criminal justice reform. Well, you got judges on the ballot. You got district attorneys on the ballot. You got sheriffs on the ballot. So those are people that impact the criminal justice reform. And some of those positions actually influence your police departments. So you need to be engaged in this process by not only learning how to register, but knowing how and what it is, when the election dates are. We provide you with information as well on each election cycle with what the registration deadlines are, what the election deadlines are. And for a particular election, we also give you information for your absentee voting, for your early voting dates, and for the last day for election day. So we want you to use that, be engaged in that process. If we're talking about, a lot of people think, well, they're not doing anything for me. Well, take a look at what's happening, the budget that is passed at a state level. That's your tax dollars. A lot of young people are saying, well, I'm voting for a candidate because he signed a check for me during COVID. Well, guess what? That was your money. That was your tax dollars. And you have to look at sometimes the nuances to that. Well, you got a one-time payment that lasted for a period of time, but there were tax breaks that gave people breaks in perpetuity. So you got to look at who got benefited the most from this policy, and does it really benefit me and my community? We got to stop thinking about us as individuals and think about our communities. How can we get improved? If we talk about, I'm concerned about, inflation. Well, look at what the elected officials can do with regards to that. Number one is they could raise the minimum wage, right? Federal and state could be raised so that you can afford different things that are happening. Not only can they stop some of these inflationary things that are happening, and we know that inflation has gone down, but there's still some everyday items that are still high because there are greedy corporate people that want those rates to be high. It's not because in 2020 when COVID was there, it was because there was a supply shortage, no one was working. Well, that is no longer the problem. It's just corporate greed that is there making the inflation still be high. So how do we make that happen? How do we change that? We've got to make sure we elect the right people that will put the pressure on corporate America to do the right thing. So those are the kinds of things that we have to be engaged in. We have to know what is involved in government. Our school systems aren't teaching civics anymore. So we need to make sure our children know what governmental agency impacts them. Your congressperson can't pave your street, but your city council can, and your state legislatures can appropriate money for infrastructure. Now, the federal government has appropriated lots of money for the infrastructure fund, and it gets dwindled down to the state and to your city and county. But who makes the decision about how that money is spent and where it's spent? I can tell you, I was in Hancock County when we were talking about the American Rescue Plan and people being able to get rental assistance and utility assistance. Well, a lot of local governments, instead of giving it to the citizens, decided to buy equipment with that money. So it's important that you be on top of what money is coming to your neighborhood, but how are they spending that money for you and your neighborhoods? You cannot, that's again, holding your elected officials accountable. You can't let them come and say, vote for me, and you never see them again until the next election cycle. They should be reporting to you every month, every week, what they're doing for you. And you've got to make appointments and go sit down with them. How many of you have been up to the legislature right now? Too few hands. Too few hands. You got to show up and say, voice your opinion about things that are happening. I can tell you, just from an election standpoint, they wanted to change early voting from 21 days down to 14 days. Why? Because you all use that process. They wanted to make sure that if I reduce the number of early voting days, then I don't have to worry about the turnout that much. I can just rely on a low 1% turnout and I get elected. And then I'm not held accountable to any of you except that 1% that voted for me. I have to go back and get those people to vote for me. It's that kind of thinking that they do as politicians. I don't care whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents. They all think the same way. We just had a situation where there's an SB 233 that is what we call a voucher bill. Now, if you listen at the terminology that they use, you think, oh yeah, I want my child to get that. I want that education opportunity. But no, it took money from public schools to give to private schools. Now, everybody wants their child to get the best education. But if you can afford a private school, because the $6,500 that you're going to take from public school isn't going to be enough for a private school. I'm going to tell you that now. There's just a private school just now closing in the city of Atlanta. So that tells you, but if that money goes from the public schools to the private school, it doesn't come back with that child when they come back to the public education. So you have to be aware of what's happening and what it really means when they're passing a bill. We have to thank the state election board because they were going to do away with no excuse absentee voting. They were going to tell the state legislature to put into law a bill that would do away with no excuse absentee voting, meaning that you'd have to have an excuse to be able to vote absentee unless you were a certain age or disabled or so forth. But why was that? Because you turned out in record numbers. And quite honestly, before 2020, certain demographics didn't use absentee voting. But when 2020 came and everybody had to use it because of COVID, they go like, oh, wow, too many people showed up to vote. So how can I minimize that? And they are all doing this under the guise of it's election integrity. It's not election integrity. It had nothing to do with it. As you stated, most election officers do a great job. Some not so good, but this human error. It's not necessarily fraud, but it's human error. But as I said, no excuse absentee voting was done because of COVID, and all demographics showed up. over 60% of people used early voting and absentee voting. So we got to understand when they try to reduce these, it's a reason behind that. It's not because of any integrity issue. It's because they want to minimize the number of people that show up to vote. We're telling you, turnout matters. So you got to show up and vote. Again, I can talk about a lot of bills that have been passed besides education. There's some criminal justice. There's some sanctuary. Oh, another one is this bill about sanctuary city, SB 301. In Georgia, there are no sanctuary cities, but they're making it an issue. Why? Because immigrants are here and they want to really make it difficult for them. And most people think about the Latin or Hispanic community, but there are more immigrants than those. And for Black people, we have to think about Haiti. We have to think about the Caribbeans that are here, and people from the African diaspora are part of the immigrants. So what they wanted to say, if you're a sanctuary city, any person could claim that you're a sanctuary city. And if they did the investigation, they could take away all of your funding from that city or from that county, all federal, state, and local funding. That's your tax dollars. How are you going to take my tax dollars that come back to my community away from me? So it's, again, understanding what is happening, communicate it to everyone. You said it. Communicate to everyone what's happening and get them engaged in this process so that we have the maximum turnout. I can tell you we had 65% turnout in 2020. We need a 70 or 80% turnout. And there are a lot of states in the US that get the 80% turnout rate. Why? Because they do nothing but vote by mail. That's one way. But I'm telling you, there are lots of other bills down there at the legislature that we need to understand that will impact our communities. They're putting in place discriminatory bills. The Religious Freedom Bill, that has nothing to do with religious freedom. It's discrimination codified in law. So we need to make sure that we understand what these bills do, be engaged in it, educate everyone, make sure everyone is registered, they've updated. If they change their address, please do. There's an omnibus bill that has to do with, again, it's another version of SB 202. But here it's targeting unhoused people. As you know, there are a lot of unhoused people. So in this particular bill, unhoused people, which is good. One thing is good is that they give them a permanent address that they can use. But again, it's the local boards of election office where they say that they can use as their residential address. Well, if I'm in Hancock County and I'm unhoused, I'm not downtown in Sparta. I'm out in the county, which is the largest mass county there is. I could be 40 miles away from my county board of election, because that's why they did poll consolidation or precinct consolidation, whatever you want to call it. But again, they're doing this. You know, the law right now says that if I register to vote and I'm unhoused, I can use the address of a homeless shelter. I can use the address of a relative. I can use the address of a friend. I can even draw, if my tent is under a bridge, I can draw what the cross streets are, and the Board of Election is required to come out and give me a polling location. So it limits it down to one location that they can use. And there are some other things in there too. But I'm saying we have to be aware of what's going on. Pass it on. Whatever information you got here today, pass it on. And I tell you, People's Agenda, we concentrate on primarily African-American communities and people of color, but primarily Black people. So if you look at turnout, why do I say it's critical? If you look at it at a statewide level, In all of the elections, most statewide candidates won by 200,000 votes. But we also know there was 11,700 that people tried to find for a certain candidate. But if you look at just Black people alone who registered, who were eligible to vote in 2020, there were 914,746 Black people who were registered to vote but didn't make it to the polls. So we've got to look at why they didn't make it to the polls. We need to phone bank, we need to text, we need to go door to door to find out, can we help you? Can we help you? What was the problem that you didn't make it to the polls? Those are the kinds of things that we got to understand. 900, that's almost 1 million voters. And if you add other voting demographics with that, you got over 1 million people who were registered but didn't show up to vote. That can make a difference in the outcome of any election. Any election. So that's why they want to put barriers in place so a lot of people don't show up, because they could be the margin of difference.
Thank you, Ms. Butler.
Right, thank you. That was awesome. And I got to follow that. But let me see if I can point out a couple of things. As you were talking about closing down voting locations, I thought about Hancock County. Hancock is a rural county not too far from here. And I understand they are now down to maybe 3 polling places total. And the small population, this is the dilemma that some of these rural communities are up against. Total population is less than 9,000, about 8,700. But the total land area of Hancock County is 479 square miles. By comparison, Augusta, Richmond County is 320 something square miles. So this is a huge county geographically with a very, very small population. And some of these people are having to drive 30 miles to get to a polling place because of just how big the county is. And I know they're going to say they're under-resourced, which they are. It's a very poor county. But they're having to make tough choices like, hey, we're going to force our people to drive 30 miles to a polling place. Because the numbers just kind of don't work for them. But that speaks to the importance of these decisions. I mean, that if you got to drive 30 miles, I mean, my polling place is a mile's walk from I've walked over there at some points because it's right in the middle of my neighborhood. That's a deterrent to vote for anybody if they got to drive 30 miles.
Well, first of all, they don't have cars.
Yeah, they don't have cars.
They don't have public transportation. So
yeah, even if you had a car, do you have time to make a 30-mile trip? If you're trying to raise kids and, do whatever and work and do whatever. So that is what some of folks in some of these counties are up against. I also want to point out, as you were talking about things going before the legislature and not getting enough support. A few months ago, the Alpha Kappa Alpha chapter, Zeta Xi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, led a panel discussion on policing. And I was one of the panel, I think I was moderating for that session. One of the panelists was State Senator Harold Jones. And we were getting asked questions about why there are not more services available to juveniles who are in the criminal justice system. Mental health support services and those sorts of things. And he said, well, if we had 6 more votes in the Senate, we could probably get those things passed. But in the absence of those 6 more votes, they can't get them passed. That legislation dies every time it comes up. The question was, how do you get people to get interested in voting? You got to focus in on things they like and things they don't like.
Right.
That have happened. Right. And one of the things I don't like is that we can't get more services in our state budget for these kids who are in the juvenile justice system. So you got to get people energized around, you want something to change? Well, you got to elect not just somebody, you got to elect the right person with the right perspective to get those things changed, which also means that you got to be asking them questions about how they feel about some of these issues before you commit to giving them your vote. I also just made a list of things. One other thing you said, the state legislature is actually on YouTube. I didn't know that. As informed as I am, somebody sent me a link to the State House of Representatives committee discussion about this issue of whether the mayor of Augusta should have a vote. It was about an hour long. It's a good little while. I may see if I can post it on my Facebook page. It's about an hour long, and I can share it with somebody again afterwards. If y'all want to get it, you can get it because I'll pull it up and text it to you. But it's about an hour and 20 minutes worth. And we saw the debate. You can literally see what the discussion was from legislators across the state as they considered this issue. And they really did a good job talking through the pros and cons of this. You can see how it was presented, what was said, what the responses were, and then the final vote as well. And you also got a chance to see members of our Augusta legislative delegation giving their comments. At least 2 or 3 of them commented, right? 2 of them presented it, and then 2 or 3 others gave their feedback on what they thought about this issue. So that was a very, very informative discussion. Other things to look for, things you like and what you don't like. I just start making a list of issues that the Augusta Commission and the school board have considered recently. If you look at things like, and this wasn't local, it was from one of my clients who is in another city up in, she's in Fulton County. And I was talking to her a couple of days ago about something else. And then she says, I'm really upset right now because the legislature is considering passing a bill to allow an adjoining city to essentially take land from us and move it from our city to theirs. It's like, what? They can do that? Well, yeah, they can do that if the state legislature says they can. So those are the types of things that they consider here locally. Affordable housing programs. If you want more affordable housing, yes, Augusta uses some of its federal and state and local resources to do that. But if that needs to be an area of emphasis, if that's a priority for us, we need to be electing people who are thinking about issues like that. Things like park improvements. I know I hear it over and over again that the feeling is that some parks get more consideration and more resources than others. One of the ones, the major park closest to me being May Park, we look around and go, when's the last time something happened in May Park? Well, luckily, the state of Georgia made some funding available. The city Parks and Recreation Department applied for it with the support of the commission, and we were able to get some money for that. But that's just how those things happen. It's got to go through multiple channels. And again, your people who are representing you have to know that that's important to you. So if you look at affordable housing, park improvements, ambulance service is a big one. And I know a lot of us were very dissatisfied with ambulance service. We finally have had some changes along those lines, but you also have to pay attention to the fact that not everybody's sitting up there on the Augusta Commission supporting those changes to the ambulance service. So it's a lot of responsibility for us to pay attention to how these folks voted on these key issues, but it's worth it so that we know who it is that we should be supporting. I talked about mental health services for juveniles, mental health services generally. I know the legislature has made some improvements over the last few years, but there's still a lot more that could be done along those lines. I mean, I have a cousin who lives in South Georgia who has a son who is profoundly autistic. When he has a meltdown, theoretically, what I'm told by the state of Georgia's disability services, because I was, trying to help my cousin look into all of this, what's supposed to happen is there's supposed to be a crisis response team that can get to your home within 30 minutes. I think it's supposed to be their standard. And my cousin swears up and down that she has called them, and it took 2 hours for that crisis response team. I mean, the crisis was over by the time they got to the house, sort of thing. And she has lost faith in calling. She didn't even call anymore. And, the state folks tell me that the services supposedly have improved and they can now respond more quickly. But, she's lost so much confidence in them, she doesn't bother to try anymore. So things like that. There needs to be more funding. If you're going to have a real crisis response team that can get there in 30 minutes, Georgia's a huge state. Geographically, we are absolutely huge. So that means you got to have a lot of teams strategically positioned to get anybody to your house and to any house in Georgia in 30 minutes. Changes in voting laws you made reference to. Guess what? The state legislature does that too. And then here on the local level, changes with school closures, school mergers. The school system now is rolled out this huge plan to modify, looks like everything. And I'll be honest, I haven't studied it in detail. One of the things I'm hoping to do is after I get through candidates on local matters, I want to bring in the school board chairs to come in and talk about, really what the objective is and how this is supposed to benefit kids, and does it in the end translate into a more educated child, to make all these changes. And those are the questions we have to ask. How does it benefit the child? So there are a number of issues for us to say we like and don't like. But you just got to start thinking. You got to get motivated. The expression "stay woke." We got to keep our eyes open about what is really happening and ask the right questions of the people that we have elected or we're considering electing, so that we know where those people really stand.
Thank you so much, ladies. Ms. Jackson, you brought up a point about Senator Harold Jones talking about the number of senators that were needed for us to be able to get things done. Would you and Ms. Butler speak to, in 2008, we elected President Obama. In 2010, we did not go back to the poll to elect his support system. And I'd just like for you to talk to that about how important it is to vote in other elections other than just presidential.
Yeah, exactly. Those things that I just talked about, the state and local governments are often the most overlooked, but those are the ones that have the most direct impact many times on your quality of life. I mean, if you're worried about your child having a safe place to play in a public park, federal government is not going to help you on that one. Warnock and Ossoff, not going to have much to do with that at all. That's going to be the people that we elect here locally. Your potholes, I talked about public safety earlier with the sheriff's office. You worried about what happens in the jail? That's going to happen locally. That is going to be your sheriff that has control over that. There are just so many things that, I know everybody's happy to get their stuff. If you're on Medicare, Medicaid, and even Medicaid, let's talk about that one too. The federal government makes expanded Medicaid system available, but guess what state hadn't voted for it? I mean, Georgia is one of only 10, I think I heard on the news yesterday, one of only 10 states that hasn't approved that. And even North Carolina, where I used to live, CBS Morning News had a couple of North Carolina state senators on to talk about how they arrived at the decision to go ahead and support it. They said, we sit here and we Democrats and Republicans fight against each other, but at the end of the day, our citizens elect us to solve some of these problems we have. And one of the problems was people who couldn't get adequate health care. So they made a decision to get past all of this political rhetoric and make a decision that was in the best interest of the folks who really needed their medication. So Georgia is going to have to start thinking differently. I think we have positioned ourselves, and I'm using we, it's not all of us, but some of us have positioned ourselves to put partisan politics above the needs of people in many occasions. And this Medicaid expansion is one of the classic examples of that. How can you deny health care to people when the federal government is making it available to you? All you have to do is sign up. Why would you say no? So we really have to watch the folks, again, my constant thing, watch the folks who elected, ask the right questions, and yes, and pay attention to what it is that you like and don't like. And I think that motivates people. You're talking to the next guy. But you can have some Medicaid for your grandmother if your legislature can sign off on it, but they haven't signed off.
Right.
You said it eloquently, but I want to say that when we go vote, we have to vote in every election. And if you look at the schedule here, it looks like a lot. And that's every year because you have special elections for people that die or someone resigns. You have the normal primaries versus general elections. So you've got to be engaged in every election. You can't sit out an election. It's too important everything that happens, the Medicaid expansion, education, criminal justice reform, the environment, all of these things when we get flooding, all of the benefits that are really your money, it's your money that's coming back to your community. And when you don't get that money, it goes to some other community. Let's just be clear about that. So we want to make sure that we elect the right people. So when you get a ballot, you can't skip a race. You've got to know every race that's going to be on the ballot. You can get a sample ballot. You can mark that sample ballot before you go vote. You can take it in with you and just look at the machine. Oh, yeah, that name's this. It speeds up the process so you don't have to read the ballot all the way. Get you a sample ballot, take it in with you. Vote all the way down to that referendum question. And if you don't understand that referendum question, make sure you find somebody. Usually you have to get a lawyer to help you interpret it, but no, that's not true all the time. But there are some people that know what it means, and get someone to explain to you. When I don't know something, I'm going to ask. If I don't know, and you ask me a question, I'm going to say, I don't know, but I'll go find the answer. Go do research. And if you still can't find the answer, make sure that you do. Go to the websites of all of these candidates. And a lot of candidates be on there. They don't have a website. You go wonder, well, what are you running for? How am I going to find out about you? If somebody is a candidate and don't have a website or some way for me to contact them, I'm a little leery of them. Maybe I need to stay away from them, but not necessarily all the time. Maybe they just don't know how. Maybe they need to get someone. And more importantly, if those elected officials don't do it for you, you know what? They're your employees. I used to work in corporate America. I was a VP of human resources before I came to nonprofit world. So to me, my job was to recruit, train, and retrain and fire, right? So if you recruited a candidate by hiring them to work for you because they're your employees, you talked to them, you told them these are the things I want you to do differently, and they don't do it, that's called what I call training them. If they don't do what you want them to do, and you keep saying, now listen, I told you this is what I need for my community, and they still don't do it, well, the apprentice said, you're fired. That's what you need to tell them, you're fired. But if you can't find a candidate that will do the right thing, then run for office. You can run. I mean, we've had young people that run. I have a young lady that works with me named Mary Pat Hector. She's been doing nonprofit work, getting students food on campus since she was 10 years old. And she ran for office at 19, would have been the youngest person for a new city. They did a new city called Stonecrest. Of course, she had to fight to get on the ballot because they said 19, you're too young. Well, there was nothing in the charter that said she couldn't run, right? All you had to be was a citizen, you voting in that district. And she met that requirement. She would have been the youngest city council person, but she lost by 22 votes. She had 22 of her friends on the block that didn't show up to vote, that if they had, she would have been on city council and made the difference that they were advocating for as young people. So what I'm saying to you is run. When you don't get the right people, you run. You be the change that you want to see. So don't be afraid of it. I mean, even if you don't have a lot of money, there's a thing called paupership. You can actually run as a pauper. In other words, you ain't got to have no money. So do that. I mean, you may not be able to do that, but you can get your friends to help you. There are different ways to run, but run for office. And the reason I say pauper is because they're qualifying fees. So if you say, I can't afford this, I want to be a pauper, I want to run as a pauper candidate, then do that. But get out there and be engaged in the process. You cannot skip an election. A lot of people, young people especially, are saying, I'm going to skip the top race because I'm concerned about Gaza. I am too. I really don't like what's going on. I want a two-state solution, but they've been fighting 400 years. I don't know if it ever come in my lifetime. But the thing about it is, I said, yes, that's important. But how are you going to get someone in office that will make that change in policy is by voting the right person in to do that. And if you skip the race, then you give your power to someone else that may not do that. I'm afraid about us being Gaza right here in the US, if you listen to rhetoric that is being said. So the idea is you got to be engaged, but you got to be, as I said, informed, active, and motivated, and holding your elected official accountable. First, you got to be engaged, you got to be informed, and then you got to hold those elected officials accountable. Our theme this year is mobilizing block by block. So get your block. Get everybody on your block. Make sure they are voting. Get you a phone tree. Knock on the door. I'm forming a phone tree for our block because our block needs X done to it. Whatever is important to your neighborhood, you need to get everybody on that block engaged in this process and vote in every election. Every election, not one, not two, but every election. And vote what? All the way down the ballot to the end, beginning at the top and go to the end. Don't skip a race. Please be informed about every race. Mark your sample ballot. Take it with you. When you take your ID, you can have your sample ballot with you and take it with you. You can get your ballot on mvp.sos.ga.gov. That's my voter page on the Secretary of State's website. It has everybody, every county's sample ballot. They have all the candidates that have qualified on there. They can tell if you do an absentee ballot, you can track your absentee ballot, whether it's been received, whether it's been rejected, or what else you need to do to get it done. It tells when you vote in person. I had a person call me with our election protection team saying, I voted, but guess what? My husband and I went the same place. His showed up as he voted in person. Mine didn't. Mine said the ballot was canceled. So why was my vote canceled? Well, what happened was when she went to vote in person, the first time they couldn't find her, they gave her the wrong ballot, so they canceled it. But they gave her a right ballot and she voted it, but it didn't get uploaded in the system. So, but she, thank God, the election supervisor had the written documentation that supports that she did vote and her vote got corrected. But you got to be on top of it. You got to make sure that once you voted, that it does count. And you can see that on the Secretary of State's website, mvp.sos.ga.gov. That's the way you find it on my voter page. You don't have to do all that long name I just gave you. Just Google my voter page and it will come up for Georgia. So make sure you know about yourself. Check your family members to make sure their votes got counted. And if they hadn't gone to vote, you got to call them and say, let's go. You know, we got to make sure everyone on your block is engaged in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll open up the floor for any questions for our panelists. Yes, ma'am. Could we get you to stand, please? Thank you.
If you're talking about the city of Atlanta, is the mayor and city council. Now, some people are going to be in favor of Cop City because I talked to the neighborhood association around Cop City. They're in they're in favor of it. But a lot of people are thinking Cop City is going to be militarized, meaning that people from the Israeli communities that come over, military that are very aggressive, will come here, and it's going to be for turning on us as people. But again, you got to go to your city council and your mayor about Cop City because we're talking about a city um, function, a city institution, a city facility that your city dollars and some federal dollars are paying for. But they're all your tax dollars. So you need to go to your city. And by the way, come up here and show your mobilizing block by block. This is our theme. Evidently, you working with us at the People's Agenda. That's our theme, mobilizing block by block. All of us are putting the boots on the ground to make sure we go block by block to get people engaged in this process. But city council is where you go.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Can I take a microphone so we can? Oh, wonderful. We're going to bring you a microphone, sir. Just a minute.
Hi, my question is simply how can we, as a disabled community, become more visible in the movement for, getting it out to the community because we are a part of the community. But I think I'm representing Walton Options, and we're not far from here, but really want to get the disabled community involved because we understand the power of voting. So how can we get more involved or become more visible in the community?
Issues related to disability are unique, somewhat unique from the standpoint of people at local, state, and federal levels. The folks we elected, all three levels, have a hand to play in advocating for the rights of people with disabilities and making life a little bit easier to navigate. Of course, obviously, you know about ADA having been passed several years ago now. What I would suggest that you do, get organized is always the thing to do. But once you get organized and think through exactly what it is it that the ADA is not sufficient? Does it need to be updated or modified? Or is it that organizations are not sufficiently following the ADA rules and regulations? So just kind of, once you get organized, figure out what the real changes that need to be made are, and then you can figure out which level of government, if it's local, if it's state, or if it's federal, that would have responsibility for addressing the particular things that you're concerned about. The same suggestions that we both made, staying woke, paying attention to what's going on, having regular open communication with your legislators, because I will say there are so many issues and so many things that your average elected official, average person, average elected official is not going to know about. I mean, like for instance, there was one issue I've had on Local Matters. A couple of people come in and talk about foster care. One thing I before I actually worked in an area related to that, I didn't have any clue of what happens to a foster child after he or she ages out. I didn't know what happens to them. The rest of most of us have the ability and the privilege. Once we turn 18, nobody's kicking us out of the house. We have the privilege to stay. It might get a little tough, or your parents might tell you to pay rent, but they might tell you got a couple choices: military, school, trade school, or job. They got some standards for you to meet, but they don't just kick you out for the most part. These foster kids get kicked out. They don't have anywhere to go. I mean, one day I was downtown on the Riverwalk. I typically walk down there. And I ran into a young lady, and I don't know what her circumstances were, but she asked me for some money. And she said, I had gotten kicked out, but I got some place to stay. but I paid the deposit, all this kind of stuff. I just don't have any money for food. So, I gave her whatever I had in my pocket. But I wonder, what led to this circumstance. Because this was a young, I'm thinking she probably was 18 or 19. And my guess is that she was probably a foster child and had gotten kicked out. So I just say that to say people don't know what you're up against until you tell them. So you got to make sure that folks at the local, state, and federal level know what the obstacles are and what changes would need to be made in order to make life more livable and improve the quality of life.
I like to say that there are a lot of disability associations already out there. I know I worked with the National Association of the Blind, with the Nile. There's a Georgia Disability Association out there that you could join as a part that are doing great work to make sure things happen for disabled community. I know from an election standpoint, all of the polling locations have to have accessibility. I also know that the equipment there has to be a dedicated form of a voting equipment available for the disabled, and even for people who are illiterate. I mean, you can actually ask for an enlarged ballot, and you can actually vote on the machine using an enlarged ballot. If you can't see, and I'm almost blind myself, can't see very well, but again, there are associations out there that are doing things. Just call and find out who's in your community that are doing something for the disability community. I'm not being partisan, but I know that certain parties have a caucus, a disability caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus has a disability caucus. And I'm sure some of the other parties also have caucuses that really are geared toward the disabled community or disability community. So join those, be involved in that. Make sure that you know. And there's one thing about the equipment that we have. A lot of people, it has the audio system. The system that comes with the Dominion system wasn't working very well. So the disability community brought in their own kind of equipment that was better, and they're working with the Secretary of State to make sure that the systems, the voting systems, are improved so that they can use the equipment there. A lot of people, when they talk about let's have hand-marked ballots, well, I'm against that. For that very reason, because there are people who are disabled, who are blind, who want to vote independently, that you take that ability away from them when you say hand mark. And if one group, and they're saying, well, they can have an equipment that allows them to, well, then if you're in a small polling location, then, and you only have one person that votes there, then I can tell who you voted for. And your ballot is supposed to be secret. So that's not a viable option. So to me, even for my dad was he could read, but he couldn't read very well, or he couldn't see. So he asked for an audio ballot. So he could then listen to his ballot and push the answers like on a telephone pad. So there are things that are available from a voting perspective as well that you can be engaged in to make sure that your community is well represented. I know a lot of fire stations are supposed to be polling locations, but they didn't have wheelchair access. Again, and they've been there for hundreds of years. And I'm going, did you know the ADA was passed back in the 1900s there? You're supposed to be able to, 1972, I believe it was, that you need to really have that accessible. And then they use that as an excuse to consolidate polling locations. Well, now you've been knowing this for years. So why are you now just consolidating? No, go ahead and fix the polling location so that it can be accessible. So we have to look at those kinds of things to make sure that that happens and be engaged. There are organizations that definitely work with just the disability community. Become a part of that.
Thank you. Yes. Can we get a microphone, please?
Yes, I've been working with the League of Women Voters, with Georgia, and all of us. One of the things we've been really good at is registering people to vote. But as Janice showed us, we've not gotten them to the polls. That to me is my priority this year, is how do we get them to the polls? And I was nice with you having the be able to know and to be able to tell people you are able to get to the polls if you call this number, if you sign up, and that type of thing. And this goes back to the disability thing. I know public transportation here in Richmond County, it's a bit. In Columbia County, there is none. So it's not even the pits. But I know we rode the bus, and how long it even took to get to a polling location especially when early voting was at the municipal building. I had a friend of mine said that it took him an hour because he had to make transitions to get to the municipal building. So when they make changes, and I'm also District 5, which is no longer at Brigham Community Center. It's now over in that itty bitty little center over by Daniel Field, which is not super conducive. So public transportation is important. And there are places that we can get involved in with that too. But that's part of our problem, is getting to the polls is not an easy matter if you don't have transportation and don't know. And then the childcare issue is another thing.
I'll start off and I think we have to start asking the people who didn't vote why, because we never know what's going on. I think we'll find sometimes that they didn't even know that there was an election. I have had that happen when we had the special election for the SPLOST, Coliseum SPLOST, for instance. I would just start calling the people, but hey, what are you planning to do? You know, are you supporting this or not? And a couple of them said, we got an election? What is that? What we voting for? So our system of letting people know that there's an election is broken. That's one thing, but there are probably a bunch of other things too. Some of it is just cynicism and apathy. It's like, I ain't gonna change nothing, no way. Well, I'm going out here. My condition is gonna be just the same, whether I go vote or not. So the whole voter education piece is a huge thing. But I would, and I'm not sure I've ever, if somebody's have to have done a study on why people didn't go vote, why register vote, why you bother to register and then you don't follow through. There's got to be some information out there. But we got to use that to really understand the root causes of why people aren't going.
I can tell you, we provide rides to the polls. Again, we have a toll-free number, 877-524-8683. But we also have a website, ridetothepoll.com, RIDETOTHEPOLL.com. And it's on our materials here. And I also want to say that we work with a lot of the churches that will provide their vans and their drivers. We actually pay for gas and the stipend for the drivers. So when we don't have our people actually come up and volunteer their cars, we ask that you have a valid driver's license and that you have insurance. We have insurance, but you need insurance also on your car. So when we don't have people that will provide that ride to the poll, or we'll go rent a van from Enterprise or Budget or somebody who will do that for us. We have young people that actually will do Lyft and Uber codes. They actually will schedule the ride for the voter and schedule a ride back to their home. Now, a lot of voters try to get us to go take them to the grocery store and all the other places. And we say, no, we can only take you to voting. So when you call, just remember, it's only for voting. It ain't going to take you to the grocery store. So don't get mad with us, but our time is valuable because we're trying to schedule so that we can cover as many people as we can. I have a young lady that works in Washington County that just last week for election day only worked one day, got 300 rides, took 300 people to the polls, just alone. Just two people. You have one person drive and one to help the voter go inside in case they need assistance. So they did 300 people. I know because we keep a list and I counted them, 300 to the polls. Now think if she hadn't done that, there would have been 300 less, maybe less than 1% would have voted even. So we're saying we're going to make a way to find for you to get there. Just call us. We will do that. There are a lot of groups that will be offering it in November. In this primary for the presidential preference, a lot of groups that normally do provide rights to the poll actually called us on election day to tell us we're going to refer all our people to you. And we had to scramble to find people, but we were determined we were going to find ways for people to get to the polls. And that's why we use Lyft and Uber codes. I don't have a budget for that, but my budget made a way for that. And I'm just have faith that I'll get that money some other way to make sure I can do it again in May and November. So, or even for a runoff election. Oh, by the way, one of the things, runoff election costs extra money too, where it's such a low turnout. But there's been a program, a law that was introduced that would have alleviated the need for runoffs and would have saved you as a taxpayer money. But guess what? Your legislature decided to ban ranked choice voting totally. It's in place for the military, but for you and I, we can't have ranked choice voting. We can't just do it once. What ranked choice does is you rank the people 1, 2, 3, 4 as to who you want to have that position. So they didn't like that because that may mean that I may not get elected. Well, if you're doing your job, you'll get elected because most people are going to rank you number 1. But if you're not doing your job, yeah, you may not get ranked right. But the idea is that ranked choice voting would save money for you to actually not have to go back for runoff elections, which nobody normally knows that if you don't get 50 plus 1%, you got to go back for a runoff election. And that would alleviate the need for that by doing ranked choice voting.
I also want to mention about the runoff, since we were talking about people not coming out to vote. I mean, that 50 plus 1 trips up a lot of people because people will look at folks who ran, might have been 4 people in a race, for instance, and the leading vote getter might have gotten 47% of the vote. I think this actually happened in Augusta a couple of years ago. And his supporters, I talked to the person one day, he said, my supporters thought that I had won already. So they didn't know that there was a runoff that they had to come back out for. And then he wound up losing in the runoff because his people didn't come back. We thought you won already. No, man, you had to get back out for the runoff, and they just didn't do it. So that those rules trip people up, and they have to be rules of the game. We understand that. But in some states, I mean, like I followed the Memphis mayoral election last year. It's probably because Judge Joe Brown was in there. Y'all remember Judge Joe? Judge Joe Brown was running for mayor. And I was following, there were like 16 people running for mayor or something crazy like that. And the guy who won it with 32% of the vote. They don't do runoffs in Tennessee like that. So, in some states that works, but in Georgia, that doesn't. So, and there was one other thing I wanted to throw in, unrelated question, but I thought about it that you were talking earlier about who runs for office. We really have to work on finding people who are well-intentioned to run for office. Because a lot of these people are running for office for the very wrong set of reasons. We also have to find, and I do this through, I moderated a couple candidate forums a couple years ago, and as well as interviewing people on local matters. And some of these candidates are hard pressed to give you a 3-minute explanation for why they want to be in office. And that scares me. That you can't articulate why you're willing to spend this much time. Because being an elected official is a huge time commitment. And I wonder if they know what they're getting themselves into when they're running. You've
Mhm.
been elected official, so you may want to
Mhm.
speak to this.
Mhm.
But do they understand what kind of time commitment they're taking on to do this? Do they understand what the office entails? Because they really, I mean, I have literally gotten one sentence answers for why somebody wants to run for office. And, you know, one of those candidate forums that I moderated in 2022 with school board candidates, the school board, and it was a special election for tax commissioner at that time. And we were giving them like 90 seconds to respond to a question. Some of them couldn't fill 90 seconds. So we really have to think about who's out there. And I know a lot of people don't put themselves up to run for office because of the time commitments and because, you know, I got to make a living, you know, do I have time for this? But it really is something to think about. One of the other things that you were talking about, websites, checking the website for candidates, and if they don't have one, that might be a red flag. That is important. One of the other things I always find to be a red flag is that they won't show up for candidate forums and other opportunities to talk about their platforms. It's like, what are you running from? You know, why won't you get out and talk to people? Those are just all things that cause me to ask questions. So, Mr. Former elected official, you want to respond to some of that?
I would love to.
Go right ahead.
So, as far as the serving in elected capacity, it's a huge time commitment. You know, you see the meetings on television, and there seem to be an hour, sometimes hour and a half. But what you have to remember is there's a meeting before the meeting, then you go to the meeting, then you go to the meeting after the meeting, and your phone starts ringing about 7 o'clock in the morning, and it might stop at midnight. If you are effective in getting things done, people outside of your district will also call you. And most of the time, you hear about things that you didn't do as opposed to the things that you did get done. I mean, so those are some of the negative things. But the positive things, and what I enjoyed the most, is you're in a position of power where you can help people who, when you're sitting on our side of the table, normally don't have any other help. There are opportunities to help children, there are opportunities to help the elderly, there are opportunities to help any group in the city, but you have to be willing to work with others that are serving with you, um, build a consensus, and you have to be able to make deals to get the things that you want for your constituents and help others get things that they want for theirs. There's a lot of information that you have to be able to make the right decisions, and that information sometimes is difficult to get. The history of in Augusta has changed from the time that we consolidated, where there was a strong mayor before and a weak council. At that time, the city of Augusta was about to go bankrupt, and the city and county consolidated, and the government was changed to be strong commission and weak mayor. Now the mayor wants to go back to having a stronger position, which I personally think is a terrible idea, but you'll do your research and figure it out for yourself. Yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to say that anyone that has problems, please call
Okay.
our election
Perfect.
protection hotline. It's 866, I'm sorry, I'm getting my right to the poll number confused. But our election protection number is 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683. So if you encounter any kind of problems when you're voting, please give us a call. We have lawyers on duty. They're pro bono lawyers that will work for us and get things changed. So please, if you encounter any problems, go vote early. Early voting is the way to do it. Don't wait till election day, because if you encounter a problem during that 21-day period, we can get it corrected. But on election day, it's very difficult to get it corrected so your vote counts on election day. The other thing I want to say, and I'm just wrapping up so I can make sure I get these little points in. I didn't
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
forget them. We need federal legislation that will protect the right to vote again. The 1965 Voting Rights Act that so many people gave their lives for us to be able to vote. And our president here gave you what used to be, what you had to do in order to get, just to be able to vote. And some of these barriers are now new barriers, but like, ID, that we didn't have to do ID. In Africa, everybody just puts their thumbprint and put it down, and you're there. That ballot in Africa, I monitored the presidential election in South Africa. The ballot has pictures of every candidate on the ballot with their flag. So if you can't remember or you can't read, at least you know who that person is that you've been speaking to in your community that you want to vote for. So there are things that we could do differently here to make our system work. But I want to make sure that we get a federal voting rights legislation back. Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff have introduced the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We need those protections back. Why? 1965 Voting Rights Act had a section called Section 5 that meant any changes to any election law or procedure had to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice before it could be implemented. So if you look at the 2013 decision with Holder that gutted the Voting Rights Act, then we need that provision back in place. The freedom to vote gives standards that have to be put in place for all elections everywhere, not just in Georgia, but all 50 United States and territories would have to have these standards in place so that no matter where you go to, you know how the voting process works. And that's one thing we have to give Kathy Cox credit for, us having one voting system machine here to vote on. Because before, if you were in Valdosta, you voted on one type of equipment. If you were in Rome, you voted on another. If you were in Atlanta, you voted on another. And if I moved there, I wouldn't know how to vote. She gave us a standardized system to vote on. That's why we have the voting equipment like we do. We had asked for a paper ballot so that a person could see that what they put in the machine was really what they voted for. You now have that. So you do to a degree. It has a QR code at the top we want to get rid of, but that can be done. The Secretary of State is talking about having a QR code reader at each facility, at each polling location, so you can read your ballot knowing that the code says what the paper says. And then you actually scan it, and it's secured and it's counted after that. So again, you've got to know what's available. We need the Freedom to Vote Act, and we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So please call your Congress people and your senators. How many know who your congressperson is? Great, everybody in here. If you don't, go look it up on My Voter page. It has who your representatives are right now. And then you can find out who's running against that person. Now, if you don't know that person, everybody knows they're senators, right? Yes, maybe no. mvp.sos.ga.gov. Make sure you know who your senators are and that you know who to vote for. You also have on that page who your county government is, who your city government is. So you need to make sure you know that. Go look that information up so you can make an appointment. Go make an appointment Monday. Say, I want to come meet you to see what you're going to do for me. Or what have you done for me lately? That kind of thing. So please do. And I know a lot of people don't like this, but I throw in another federal legislation. We need to have balance that congressional and Senate delegation is DC statehood. So, but please, freedom to vote and John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and for those who will do the DC statehood.
Thank you so much.
Yes, one plug, shameless plug for the Augusta Lumley Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We purchased, invested some of the chapter's money a few years ago, was it 4 years ago now, Danita? We, when Sarah Milo was our president, we invested some money in buying some signs that say vote, some yard signs. We got some yard signs, we got some magnets, car magnets. It just so happens that my car is white and the sign's red and white, so it's gonna look real good on there. When early voting starts, I'm gonna put that magnet on my car, and I'm gonna put the sign in my yard to remind these people who don't know it's election time that it's election time. So things like that help. Yeah, sorry, Milo.
And we will also have the billboards back up again.
That's right.
This
We
year.
invested money in billboards as well, to remind people, these folks that, aren't quite sure when you're supposed to vote. We want to help you know when it's time to vote. So we really need to get that out. Social action is part of our mission from 1913. We have been actively involved in that pursuit. So that is our way of bridging the gap with the voter participation.
Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
Respond to that. In 2020, 2019, when we were doing all of this, one of the things that we did was we have a lot of small organizations in Augusta that work towards getting out the vote, getting registered to vote. The People's Agenda, all the Divine Nine, League of Women Voters, New Georgia Project, Georgia Shift. There are a lot of us that banded together, and we called ourselves the Good Trouble Coalition, and work together. And I think that's the best way that we can get things accomplished in Augusta and, in this area, is working together and making that a movement, and I would love to invite everybody to do that again.
Oh, and that
All right.
reminded me.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gayla. One thing I got to say, April 20th and 27th at A.R. Johnson Health Professions School, there will be candidate forums. We're still getting the details together. I think the start time, maybe 10 o'clock for one of them and 12:30 for the other one. We got to work that part out because we've had some other issues come up. But under the leadership of our president, Sarah Hardy, we are partnering with 10 or 12 other organizations. I think last time it was 5 or 6, and now Sarah, bring we up to 12 or so. Yeah, okay. We're all going to be partnering together for consolidated forums because it's tough on the candidates to run from forum to forum to forum. So League of Women Voters has joined with us. I think Alpha Phi Alpha is joining with us, Phi Beta Sigma, Omega Psi Phi, Hope, Helping Our People Excel, Great Augusta Interfaith Coalition, Chi 85, Nursing Sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, this goes on and on. We are all coming together to put on forums, and we will feature all of the local races. We'll have, right now, tentatively, we're planning to have all of the commission candidates on one day, and then on another day, we will have the public safety law enforcement group being Superior Court judge candidates, district attorney candidates, sheriff's candidates. And we are also trying to put something together to discuss this issue of the mayor getting the vote, some type of opportunity to get information about that. So we'll be getting further information out, but we are certain on the dates. We just got to get the time.
All right. Thank you for sharing that.
April 20th and 27th. It's 2 consecutive ones because we've got so many candidates in the various races. People don't like to stay someplace all day. Laura James, is there something else I need to? And that's right. The Coalition for the People's Agenda is also a part of our partnership.
Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are actually past our time, but I do have a question that came in online, a question from Facebook that I would like to acknowledge. And that question is, what would be your recommendation to motivate and get rid of voter apathy?
Well, a lot of people are talking about making voting a holiday so that everybody can show up with no excuse to not show up to vote. The other thing is really you've got to be engaged and want to improve yourselves. You got to want to improve your community, if not for you, not for your immediate family, for the children's future. I don't have children, but I claim all my nieces and nephews. My niece here knows her baby. I've had him since he was 2, and I took him everywhere with me because I wanted him exposed to all of governmental things. But it's for the future of our children. If we care about our children and what they have to be face, and to make sure they can face it with strength and with a solid background, we need to be engaged in this process and make sure that policies are in place that will make their lives better. I mean, how many of you have had a child with their tuition, their college tuitions excused? Ooh, none here? Whoa. Yeah. There's some hands back there. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people that have gotten the benefit. I know one person got $100,000 excused. I would have loved to have gotten that, because that means that $100,000 I can now invest in the future for wealth building for my family, right? And I hope that's what they're doing, not just throwing it away, going buying a new car or something, but putting that money into an account that will build wealth. We need to think about building wealth. One of the things that the Black Women's Roundtable did, we took a look at what is the wealth of our group versus other women. You know what our wealth was? $1. Our average net wealth was $1, compared to $17,000 for others and $20,000 for others. $1 average wealth. So think about that. So when we're investing in nails, hair, all of that stuff, let's think about putting it into an account that will build wealth for our children. Too late for us, but you know, we can help our children build on wealth. And all of you who get land passed on to you, please don't give it away. Please don't sell it for $1,500 when it's worth $1 million. Know the value of what you got. Look down the line what it could be used for. Look at all these solar farms that could be out there. These cannabis farms that are now legal in Georgia to build for health purposes. It ain't for just smoking weed. It is for, you know, health purposes. Think about that. That's generating wealth you could use your land for. So think about those kinds of things when we're looking for the future. But to me, the thing that motivates me is looking for other people's children. I don't have children, but I love children. And I think that they have a lot of things that they have to confront that I never thought of. I never had to think about, am I going to get shot while I'm in school? Never had to think about that. So think about all the pressures that they're under that we can alleviate by helping them, you know, at least think about for the future. When I get my college degree, I don't have to worry about $200,000 school loan. I could actually go buy me a house, start a home, and build the wealth of my family.
Thank you so much. All right, at this time, we're going to have closing remarks and acknowledgements. Don't see Ms. Clemens, but Ms. James, are you? All right, thank you.
First of all, let's give our panel round of applause for that awesome, excellent, outstanding presentation today. the wealth of information that has been shared. So we really appreciate you. We appreciate you, Ms. Helen Butler, for traveling here to Augusta to be with us. We know, if you look at Ms. Butler's bio, you will see that she has just been on the ground for a long time, right? And, just civil rights and the work that she's done in this arena. So we appreciate, and we're so very pleased and happy to be partnered with your organization in this work because we all know that there's so much work to be done. And to our very own Miss Ellen Jackson, Janice, we know how important your voice is in our community and beyond in terms of getting that information out there in a nonpartisan way. So we appreciate what you do and your support and all. And to Mr. Keith Brown, thank you for that excellent moderating this panel today. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank Mr. Burns, Willie Burns, and Miss Juliet Ford Harris. I got to know these individuals this year, our sorority year. And it's just been a pleasure working with them. So Miss Butler, we appreciate your team. We're so we have fun when we go out. We've done a lot of productive work together. So there's much more to do. We have since September, we have registered about over 300 persons. Most of them are high school students. To date, we have registered 287 high school students here in Richmond County and Burke County. We have 2 more schools that we're going to do in next week, and we will have gone to all of our local high schools, Richmond County schools, and done voter registration. But now the next step, thank you too. So the next step, as someone said, we got them registered, but how are we going to get them to the polls? And this is just the beginning. I hope of many more events like this and getting, our young folks, excited and, galvanized to get them to the polls. So we just thank everybody for what you're doing and working together. And 100 black men of Augusta, we got to get them in all these fraternities and everything. So we thank all of you who came out today to support us. We just, as I said, we're very pleased to have provided this, and we're looking forward to many others to come. And we all know that there's a lot of work to be done. So thank you very much. And just a token of our appreciation, on behalf of thank you so much. You're still live.
thank you so much for finding out Robert to come and share with us today. And your words of wisdom, I will cherish them and take them forward. It is not an easy job, I understand. Thank you so much.
I do appreciate it.
And this is a personal gift for Miss.
For our own.
While you are taking the pictures, ladies, I just want to give you all a little tidbit. We are the majority registered voters in the state of Georgia. Women are. So if all the women came together in coalition, we could change every position in the state. Think about that. That's power. We wouldn't do that, guys. We wouldn't do that. But I just want to bring that to your attention. We are the majority registered voters in the state. We have the power.
Yes, you can, if you'd like. Okay.
There is a QR code, and they will be passed around, and I think well, it's not on the screen, but please, so please scan that and complete the evaluation for today. We appreciate that very much. And next door, we have refreshments for you. Thank you, Ms. Butler, the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, and Mr. Burns for providing refreshments today. So again, thank you. Oh, and if you didn't sign in, we need you to sign in. And if there are any who are not registered to vote, and I bet all of you in here are registered, but in the event you are not, you'll see that lady there in the red dress. You can stop by the table and vote, and we'll be get you registered.
All right, once again, we'd like to thank our panelists for sharing the information with us today, taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. We'd also like to thank Williams Memorial CME Church for hosting us today. And I'd also like to thank each of you as participants today for being here to receive this information. And I hope you will share it in the community with others who weren't able to be here. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking with you at the refreshments. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. So both of my parents went to Meharry.
Oh, wow.
And my brother went to Fisk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I'm a graduate of Tennessee State.
How about that? Okay, TSU. All right. Nice. And when was she? My parents graduated in 1940.
She had started.
Okay. My father was from Buffalo. My mother was from met at Meharry and married and moved to Augusta. So nice to meet you.
Small world.
Small world.
Big world, small world.
That's right. Yes, yes, ma'am.